Hello, everybody, and welcome to another What's Cooking with Dr. Cook. I'm your host, Dr. Allison Koch, and we are joined by a very special guest tonight. It is Dr. Ashlie Morrissey, who has her Doctor of Nursing Practice and is an adult geriatric nurse practitioner, and honestly, one of the most intelligent people I know, one of the best medical providers I've ever had the wonderful experience working with. So thank you so much for joining us today for Wine, Cheese, and Chocolate with GERD. Very excited.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And I know it's an exciting topic because I think these are three things that most people love, and then they love to seem like to hate us after we eat them, especially if we have issues with acid reflux or irritable bowel syndrome, and a lot of other medical conditions as well. Headache sufferers. These are three of the big foods that are often brought up as headache triggers as well. So I wanted to just do a bit of a dive into these three foods and talk a little bit more about them. So I know that you're going to join me, and anybody who is watching and joining can certainly, if they want to, who is allowed to have wine, of course, in whatever area they're in. But we're going to actually sample a few wines, and I want to talk about what wine does. And of course, Dr. Cook, please chime in because from a nutrition standpoint, there are certain things that you are much better versed to address than I am. But what happens when we drink, and why did certain drinks affect us differently? But we're going to talk specifically about wine. So I have three different red wines. And so, that's when we get into wine. Well, you have red wines. Why would red wine, and they're all three red wines, why would they react differently to your body? So if we start with, say, a what is kind of thought of as a dark red wine, a Pinot Noir. And so this, and I'm going to actually pour a little out. So if you think about it, it looks dark. I mean, when you look at a Pinot Noir, it looks dark. And I'm going to actually go ahead and pour out the other two that we're looking at tonight. One is a sweet red, and these are all from different labels because I also wanted to address the fact that it doesn't really matter what your wine costs. It matters what it tastes like and how it feels when you drink it. So don't know if the camera can really pick this up, but you can see through this. So this is actually, while it's still a purple color, this is a sweeter red wine. You can see through this. I also have just a blended red wine, and I'm going to pour this using a little tool, and I'll talk about this tool later, but you have to use it while you're pouring. But this is a little tool. It's called an Uno, but it actually filters out some of the things that we're going to be talking about in a moment. It will also aerate your wine if you want it to. If you don't like to decant your wine and let it breathe. I'm not that much of a wine purist. So this is just considered a blended red wine. So this is where you're going to have not the darkness that you get with a Pinot Noir, not that it's not one of the harshest things in the mouth. So sometimes I know people have asked a question, or you have been asked, is why, when you take a sip of wine, and let's just start, and Allison, join me if you'd like. I'm going to start with that Pinot Noir. So,
Actually, I chose one, and I'm
okay,
sure you know
well,
which one I picked because it's my favorite red right now, but it's the Snoop Dogg.
yes, we
It's the
we do
Snoop
love
Dogg
we
red
love 19
blend.
Crimes Snoop Dogg Cali Red, which is a blended red.
It's
Um,
it's just
it's
good.
delicious. Well, I'll start with that as well. Because it doesn't matter where we start, it's where we end up. So the thing that sometimes I am asked is why, when you take a drink of wine or of certain beers, people will actually experience this sensation of a cramp kind of right here in this area of their jaw. And it's really can be quite painful. And it can give them almost like a tingling, painful sensation in this area. And it can last up to a few minutes and then it goes away. And so, it's alarming anytime we have a sudden unknown pain that hits us. So that's actually your parotid gland. It's one of your salivary glands. And so I always let people know that it reacts to, it's an on-demand gland. So whenever it has things entering the mouth, it is also your largest salivary gland. So it immediately will squeeze out some saliva to help you start processing whatever you put in your mouth. Now, it reacts most strongly to sour things, sweet things, what are called tannic things, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit. And also if you have been a little dehydrated. So if your mouth is not moist and then you take a sip of something, that parotid gland is like, oh, I've got to get the juices flowing. And so that's why you may experience that. So it's okay. It's not pleasant, but it's not harmful in any way. So cheers. And so this being a blended red, it is not something that you have that kind of harsh tannin flavor. Now, the reason that sometimes people start having issues with wine when they have IBS, GERD, is that there are a lot of reasons, but one of the big reasons, just right off the bat, is alcohol content. Alcohol, and no matter its form, is going to actually relax um, the sphincter at the top of the stomach, and that's going to allow acid to flow back up into the esophagus. So, of course, there's nothing we can really do to get rid of the alcohol in wine. And, that's it's just one of those things that's inherent in what's happening physically. The alcohol is a relaxant, it is a muscle relaxant. So that's going to happen. It's something you just have to be aware of. It can help to take an extra dose of an antacid simply because that will decrease the acid production in your stomach. And it can also help just not to, in addition to the alcohol consumed, eat spicy or acidic foods. So you wouldn't necessarily want to have, Thai food with a lot of peppers and then wine on top of that. But when we get into then the it's interesting because wine will actually increase our serotonin production. So it does make us feel happy when we drink. Chemically, our brain is going, yay! We get all our good feeling hormones pumping, which sometimes they feel too good, but that's a whole other podcast. So the the thing that ends up happening though, when serotonin production is increased and increased abruptly like that, it actually also can work to loosen that sphincter, and it can also increase some of that acidic production in the stomach. And so it's kind of this thing of, well, we're feeling better, but then things are happening in our GI tract that are causing the irritable bowel syndrome and acid reflux symptoms to worsen. And so, excuse you for a moment. Can you send that link to my mother, please, or call her? Technical difficulties within the family. So that is sort of at its when you take that first sip, those are just the first few things that begin happening. Now, when we get more into, what is considered an actual drink, we talk about an actual. So to be completely honest, this is more than a serving of alcohol. So, and
I got you there actually. So before I took a sip, I actually poured 2 ounces of the white, and then I was going to do 3 ounces of the red. I accidentally poured four. I did measure them, and then I know that like a serving size is 5 ounces, so technically I have 1 ounce more. But
yes. Well,
maybe
and that
after that sip, this would be appropriate.
well, and then we get into women versus men because health recommendations are women have one serving of alcohol per day, whereas men are allowed 2 servings of alcohol per
Mm-hmm.
day. That is considered an acceptable amount for a healthy ingestion of alcohol per day. And well, I don't know many people that abide by that. I think that, in reality, most people are not measuring their wine pours. And, if you're at home, it's more of the Julia Child type of, cooking with wine and drinking the wine. And so that's, it's not, and that's not necessarily going to hurt you if it's something that's done rarely. It's when that is a frequent occurrence that we start worrying about the significance of long-term over consumption of alcohol. And
Right.
that is the issue there. And so,
Yeah.
we always say everything in moderation. And so if it is something that is a rare occurrence where you're having more than that one serving of alcohol, that is not something that medically I'm going to be going, oh no, this is something I'm so concerned about. But if it's something that's happening the majority of days out of a week, that's when it's very troublesome. Um,
Yeah,
so
so let's talk about that for just 1 second. So
mhm.
when people are, you know, trying to estimate what exactly is overconsumption, we're looking at what is, adverse health effects when it comes to drinking too much. That's greater than 3 alcoholic servings in one day, or greater than 7 for women or men over the age of 65 in one week, or greater than 14 beverages for men under the age of 65.
Yes. And so there's also the what's a very simple kind of self-assessment tool that, if you ever are worried, is my alcohol consumption something that I should be concerned about? There's something called a CAGE, CAGE assessment tool. And I'm always going to be a fan of these sort of objective assessment tools because it's very easy sometimes when we're participating in behaviors that may not be the healthiest for us to maybe fib to ourselves a little bit. But with that, the CAGE assessment tool, it's an objective assessment where you're saying how many alcoholic drinks are you consuming a day, and then has anyone ever questioned your alcohol consumption? And do you, and I'm actually just having a complete blank moment for G right now. And then do you need an eye-opening drink? Have you ever had any, a need to kind of that hangover cure eye-opener drink in the morning? Is that something that, you ever need? But those types of, and you can of course look that up online, just CAGE questionnaire, about alcohol consumption. But that gives, if you're ever wondering about your alcohol consumption, those type of objective assessment tools can be wonderful because it takes it out of your needing to think about, is this too much? Do I have a problem? And of course, if you start having symptoms and when I talk about symptoms of excessive alcohol abuse, that of course a big red flag is oftentimes, as in that CAGE questionnaire, are other people questioning your alcohol consumption? Is it affecting your work, social, personal relationships? Is it affecting your health in ways? Do you notice your acid reflux is worsening? Are you waking up at night more with acid reflux symptoms? The symptom I mentioned with the parotid gland, that can actually become a chronic issue if you are over consuming alcohol, where the parotid gland is just sort of in a constant state of almost a spasm. And so there are a lot of things that can start to change physically that can clue you in that there may be a problem. But if you're drinking that kind of recommended amount, and it's just, keeping it in moderation, keeping it healthy, it can still affect your health. It can, especially when you have other chronic conditions like IBS, GERD, migraines. And that's where it sometimes is a little bit difficult to tease out, what's causing it. So one of the other things I wanted to mention, and I know you've discussed this in articles and podcasts, but the FODMAPs, when we talk about sugars, I mean, wine is a it is made of fruit. So we start right there with sugars. Depending on how then it is processed, the sugar content can increase much, much more. And that's why I ended up having these three different reds, because that was one of the things I wanted to talk about. Was even though these are very similar in appearance, the sugar content within these three wines is very, very different. And for someone who feels that their reflux or their IBS symptoms are triggered by sugar intake, who is trying to follow a lower FODMAP diet, then that's something they need to be aware of. Because something like this dessert wine, um, and
Now, which
honestly, I
one's the
don't.
dessert wine?
So I was going to do just a white, but I ended up deciding to do just a dessert wine because, and I'm sorry, I don't drink dessert wine, so I'm having a parotid spasm right now. Um, it's very sweet. Um, it is just on the tongue. It is almost it's too sweet for me. It is, you can definitely just taste the sweetness right there. So that is not going to be a good choice if you're trying to follow a low FODMAP type diet. This is not going to be the wine for you. Something that is, when you think of any of the wines that are, say that they are a sweet wine, a sangria, which is a blended wine with like other fruits.
Hmm.
There are white wines that are higher in sugar content because of the way they're processed. For example, Rieslings, these kind of things. Now, when we get into the wines that have the lower sugar content, these are typically going to be your drier tasting wines. And so, if that's not something that you put that over there so I don't grab that again. Um, those are going to be your drier tasting wines. And so that can be something like a Pinot Noir. That can be, and this is the Pinot Noir, which is, you taste kind of grape, and you don't get that sugar kind of rush going on with that. Malbec, it's not going to be a port. It's not going to be anything that's been processed and allowed to just let those sugars really work. Um, but the other thing that's interesting is that, not everyone's reflux IBS symptoms are triggered by the same things. And so that's something where it may take a little trial and error. If you enjoy wine, um, and you want to drink wine, it may just take a little bit of figuring out, what triggers your symptoms. And that's where I know in medicine we talk all the time about keeping food journals, keeping symptom diaries, and it's tedious and it's hateful and no one likes to do it. But sometimes it is the best tool. it
Yes,
is
it
it
really
is the
is.
it is the best tool because I, as a medical provider, don't live in your body. And so I really, I have to rely on someone when I'm trying to give advice about, okay, well, what happens when this set of circumstances is going on? And then, okay, well, then maybe you can enjoy a drier wine. And maybe you find that even certain vineyards, because of the way that they produce their wines, work better. So, but I think I don't want to spend all our time on wine. Let's talk a little bit more about something that pairs well with wine, which is chocolate. And so, when we talk about chocolate, and we talk about irritable bowel syndrome and GERD and chocolate. So it's really interesting that there are different, well, I would say different avenues of research. So, one of the interesting things that I find is, um, so we have kind of on one hand that the high fat content in chocolate and the increase in serotonin from ingesting chocolate, which, as I mentioned earlier, with wine, increasing the serotonin can relax the sphincter and all that. So we have the high fat content,
Can I
which means
time out
it's
real quick and ask you
sure.
something? All right, so the serotonin in wine, really quick, Because isn't wine a depressant?
Okay, yes, it is. And so you have that's the interesting thing is you have that initial little boost, like that's where you feel good at, you're at the club, you're drinking with friends,
Right.
but you have a little spike, and then that's where you feel horrible afterward,
Okay.
basically, because it's you have that sort of brief a little brief burst, but then it doesn't last very long. Chocolate is actually a much longer, stable serotonin producer. So,
Ooh.
uh, but it does come with some issues because of that. So, but anything with high fat content is going to stay in the stomach longer, meaning it's slowing digestion down. And anything that slows digestion down is going to increase your risk of acid reflux because it's just kind of sitting there for a long time. So the chocolate also may contain caffeine. It may also contain something called theobromine, which both of those can also trigger acid reflux in people. Now, here's the interesting thing, though, is that studies have actually shown that the some higher cacao or cocoa containing chocolate products, they mimic the benefit of a prebiotic. So they actually increase production in the gut of certain bacterial flora that we need to be healthy. And so once again, it's kind of this, it's like with wine, we get benefit from some studies showing that there's, heart benefit with drinking a glass of red wine a day, but well, it may make your acid reflux worse. So, once it's the same thing. So when we talk about chocolate, there's a wide variety of chocolate. So, and I'm not even really going to talk about white chocolate because it's not a true chocolate, just it's made from trees. But so this is like, I had a regular chocolate bar and I have two children in my house. Um, so these are peanut butter cups, which have a milk chocolate shell. So a lot of times, especially in America, when you're looking at products that have a milk chocolate base, they may not have very much cocoa in them at all. They may actually have a type of a cocoa oil or cocoa butter listed as like an initial ingredient instead of an actual cocoa. Most people, when they start getting into talking about darker chocolates, this is kind of the product they're familiar with. It's,
Yeah, that's what I have.
everywhere. So uh, you can look. I mean, it's physically a little bit darker. I mean, there's a little bit of a color difference. And I was actually, I don't know, Allison, did you see a percentage of cocoa on this? Because I was looking earlier.
The funny thing is that I took my three little wedges for tonight's talk, and then the rest of the bar was gone with my two kids in the house.
You
So
you suffer the same fate as I.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So then you have products like this, which this is probably, I think this was the highest cocoa or cacao like concentration that I could find that was at the store. Um, and one of my fondest memories was being at like the Lindt chocolate place in Switzerland, and I just wanted them to just somehow put me on the conveyor belt and just let it flow into my mouth, but they opposed the idea. So if you actually look, so this is 78%, and then this is Hershey's Dark, which we never got a rating on, but you can see, I mean, there's a literal physical difference. Now, this is not, I'm going to put it in my mouth, but it is bitter. When you get to really high, having that parotid gland spasm, when you get to really high concentrations, you start having a bitterness that comes with that cacao or cocoa. And well, and that's okay because I feel like my gut flora just blossomed with that one bite. I can feel
I'm
that
not like
leftover.
a super like sweets person, so
Yes,
I backed everything up here with some olives.
I know. I I was mm, that I feel the lactobacillus growing right now. I mean, I can eat this. This is a good. This is a good level of sweetness. Like to me, it's not too sweet. I'm not a huge milk chocolate fan. That 78% is a little over the top, but it's once again, like I said, it's we get into that milky kind of gray area there of what is it, what is the benefit, what is the negative, where are we. The thing once again with chocolate is you're going to have a usually a lower fat percentage the higher the cacao percentage. So finding if you're using it in baking, sometimes that's something where you can substitute like a higher shaved bar, higher cacao percentage, so that you're not experiencing so much, the reflux symptoms. If it's something you're just wanting to eat chocolate, then sometimes that is simply a thing of you're going to need to actually take maybe, a little bit more of your H2 blocker or, an extra antacid dose or something so you could enjoy that because, there's no reason for most people that they can't enjoy serving of chocolate. It's just simply that be aware it may cause some of those, increase in symptoms. So, and interestingly enough, it's for some people this seems it's listed as a headache trigger, but a lot of studies have now started to look at it that we have what's called a pre-drome before a headache, meaning like the day before you have a headache, you actually have symptoms that are not the pain of the headache. But when we started actually measuring our kind of chemicals in the brain and changes in our body, we found that you may actually be craving the cacao, the things that are in chocolate as a pre-drone before that headache. And so the chocolate doesn't actually trigger headaches. It's that the headache was already starting to happen and your body was trying to get chocolate as something to help treat the headache. So it's kind of an interesting
Huh.
avenue of research. If I could sign up for that study where I ate chocolate to treat my headaches, but so far
Yeah,
they're not
I'm
recruiting. So
I'm gonna be honest with you. Like I've been looking at this, this cheese, this chocolate, and this wine, and I'm like this just looks like a migraine to me. But it's
yes.
so like delicious. Mm.
Well, and that's the thing. As I am a migraine sufferer, and have severe migraines, and it's interesting that you do, having done the, journaling and everything, that identifying triggers for my migraines. I don't identify chocolate or cheese, but sometimes if I drink a dark red wine, that will certainly do it. And
Same.
so the thing in that is it's what's called a polyphenol, which is, even if you wanted to go further, it's a tannin. Um,
Mhm.
and so tannins are found in all natural, I mean, they're found in so many different plants, trees, everything. And so that's where you can find those in so many different foods. And that polyphenols are often the culprit. That's what one of the things this little gadget is supposed to filter out,
Ooh,
is some of the polyphenols. And so I'm excited to see how this works. So we'll see tomorrow if if I have a headache tomorrow, we'll know it didn't work as intended. So
that's
well,
so
let's take a look.
exciting.
I know. Let's take a look at some cheese since you were mentioning that. So I have um who can, okay, I
Ooh.
have some mozzarella, some brie, and some cheddar. And so I want to talk a little, kind of when we think of cheese, like, is there, one of the questions I get asked a lot because everyone loves cheese. I love cheese. Maybe I'm just projecting, but what
Cheese
is
is
the
the food of the gods.
And so, what is a good cheese? What is a healthier cheese? I
Mm.
should say, not a good cheese. What is a healthier option? So, um, and you, like I said, you can certainly address this, but in general, so if you think of the fresher cheeses, so these are your unrinded, Fresher cheeses like the mozzarella, ricotta, cottage cheese, goat cheeses, those kind of things. And then we're going to get into our harder cheeses, which are like your cheddars, um, Parmesan, anything that's kind of a harder cheese. They too typically start to have a rind, whether it's applied, like a lot of times they'll have a wax rind. Then we get into our blue cheeses, which are a lot of times infused with a mold, and they also will have a rind. They're usually starting to get a little creamier, and that's kind of a good sort of rule of thumb is that the softer, creamier the cheese is, like the higher the fat content is going to be. Um, and so then when we get up into those soft, creamy cheeses, like this brie, you know, it is just squishy and creamy, and it has this. It feels almost like a velvet. I don't know if I don't know if anyone else pets their cheese, but it is a the rind is edible, and you can see, the little rind, but it feels almost like a velvet. It's a soft rind and it's edible and it's delicious, I think. Not, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but those types of soft, creamy types of cheeses, they're typically going to be the highest in fat. Now, and then we could say, kind of as a little asterisk at the end, things that are not technically cheese, but are sold as cheese products. So you get like your, if it says like a pasteurized processed cheese food or something like that, like your
Right.
Velveeta, like your Velveeta, and I'm not knocking it because Velveeta makes wonderful dips and wonderful macaroni and cheese, and sometimes that's great. I'm just saying let's all be aware of what it is and what it's not. And technically, those are really not considered cheese product. They're cheese products. They're not considered a cheese technically, because there's just so much other non-cheese type things put in there. So I'm gonna actually. I don't know. I don't think you have any mozzarella. I'm sorry. No mozzarella for you, Allison.
Nope, but I did pre-portion the cheese so everybody can see what a serving size of cheese looks like. So
Wonderful. I,
my
I
my
pre-portioned my
favorite cheese is
cheddar.
dill Havarti. That's 1 ounce of dill Havarti. So I guess if we're this is my hand, this is 1 ounce. So that's a serving of cheese, 28 grams, which I actually put on my food scale. So it's a real thing. And then here is a sharp cheddar, which
Mhm.
a little bit smaller, but that's 1 ounce. And then a low fat or reduced fat white cheddar, and that's 1 ounce. So yeah,
So the harder cheeses, um, they are typically going to have less lactose. So although
mm-hmm.
IBS and lactose intolerance are different beasts, I do mention that just because sometimes people are dealing with multiple issues, and that is something to consider. So if you're thinking you may have a lactose intolerance, the harder cheeses are going to be a better option. So we get into, once again, the high fat concentration. So the higher the fat concentration, and as I mentioned, when we talk about in what we have here, the brie is going to be the highest thing that I'm dealing with right now. This, it will hit my stomach. It will stay there longer because it will take more time to process. Mm, it's so creamy and good, though.
It's not my favorite.
I know
Um,
everyone has
yeah.
their loves. I think if it came from a mammary gland of an animal, I think I like it. So, um, and of course, the mozzarella for most people is going to be the least reactive, like that type of cheese. Most people are going to have, be it IBS, be it even migraine sufferers. those sort of fresh cheeses, those unrind cheeses, for most people seem to be the least type of reactive. For most people, when you start, the longer a cheese is aged, and even for migraine sufferers, if we go back to headache issues, not just migraines, cluster headaches, all sorts of headaches seem to be triggered by aged cheeses. There's something called tyramine. And so
Mhm.
that starts to develop the longer the cheeses are aged. And that can really start to kick in the headache symptoms for people. So that is, if we're looking at cheeses, just thinking of sort of where they fall on sort of is it a fresh type cheese? Is it a hard cheese? Is it a soft, creamy aged cheese? And then making a choice that may not cause symptoms based on that. That's really, and then once again, it's a thing of sometimes making a decision of, okay, I'm going to have, you know, cheese, but I'm not going to eat it on, I'm not going to eat it with spicy peppers, or I'm not going to eat it with in a dish that has, a lot of tomatoes, if those seem to set off your reflux. So, um,
Yeah, that brings up a really good point about alcohol. I know we touched on wine, although not the white wine yet, but um, with alcohol, lower pH, liquors, we're looking at gin, we're looking at tequila, we're looking at non-grain vodkas. And really where you can get in a lot of trouble is with the mixers. So if you're having those, but you're adding in, say, tomato juice, so Bloody Mary, black pepper, or
Worcestershire, yes.
yes, exactly.
You're getting
Citrus juices, a
Well, and the
screwdriver.
FODMAP, yes. I mean, if you're trying to follow a FODMAP diet and if you're getting, like you mentioned, a screwdriver and it's orange juice, or if you're getting a margarita and you're getting,
Right.
the high sugar content from a mixer, I mean, it's something you just have to take into consideration.
Hmm.
If you're trying to follow a low FODMAP diet, then something like one of the liquors you mentioned with a low pH and a diet tonic, or a so something that is not going to hit you in the glycemic index, basically, is probably your best option.
Definitely. Definitely. Then those you know, beers, just the carbonation can really
Yes.
with the GERD.
Well, and that's true with any type of carbonated beverage. I mean, it's beer, soda, any or pop if you're from the north. It's whatever, anything that has the bubbles. Drinking that, shortly before you're going to be horizontal in bed is just not a good idea. It's going to try to find the path of least resistance to get out of your body, and that's going to be through the up the esophagus, and it brings that acid with it. So,
Definitely. So is there like a food or beverage that just triggers a symptom with you, but you just love to eat it or drink it anyways?
so probably I would have to say the food I'm thinking of, and I don't think it's the cheese that is the culprit. But I do, well, it may be part of the culprit, but I'm going to deny it. But I do love like a bruschetta, which I think because of the citrus in the tomatoes, and then there is the cheese there. It's just kind of a combination of things. Um, that seems to typically a lot of things. If I'm eating a lot of tomatoes in general, that seems to trigger things for me. But that gets into a whole other issue of what fruits and tomatoes, fruit, vegetable, whatever it like, whatever it identifies as. I just love tomatoes, and they sometimes don't love me very much in return. So that's okay. It's like I said, you can always make the decision to partake of things that might give you a little pain, just knowing that you're going to have to take an extra antacid on the back end. So that's my option for tomatoes in general. But no, I do enjoy. I mean, I always enjoy just a glass of wine. But as a migraine sufferer and someone with reflux, it's something I just have to be aware of. That okay, I will probably have a glass of red wine, and then, as you mentioned, let's just touch on the white wines. They seem to have a lower polyphenol profile in general, and so I will often switch to a white wine, a low sugar white wine, after maybe a glass of a dark red. Although my preference would be to drink more of the dark reds, but it's just if you have to, you always have to take is the cake worth the bake? And sometimes drinking more than one glass of a dark red wine is just not worth it for me. So
Right, right. Actually, tonight for my white, I have the Martha Shard,
okay,
which is
so Snoop and Martha staying together. I like
Snoop
it a lot.
and Martha are in the house. So it's not too bad. It's not too sweet, you know.
Okay.
So the sweeter the wine, typically the more acidic the wine. So
Yes.
learned a lot for sure. This is very interesting. One thing that's been coming up a lot is questions about acid reflux developments in long COVID. Is that something you're seeing?
I frankly, I think there's nothing that you could say and then at the end of it say post COVID and the answer would be no. I mean, um, there is every system of the body um, that we're seeing that can be affected post COVID. And that is why it is, still something to be taken seriously. Young people who have very few symptoms, and then have, the COVID toes. That's nothing that anyone ever thought would be an issue, and long term, sort of almost where the body is basically attacking different parts of itself. And so, yes, I'm not working in GI predominantly as in the outpatient world. That's not something that I'm hearing about a lot, but I'm certainly seeing a lot of nerve type change, nerve damage type changes, sort of autoimmune type changes. Um, and so there, at this point, like I said, I don't think there's anything that you can say, is this occurring in people post COVID? And you can just definitively say, no, we're not experiencing that, or people aren't experiencing that, because it's just something that, um, you know, top to bottom, people are experiencing long term effects that would just never have occurred to anyone. So,
Interesting. Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. I mean, it's just a constant source of pain for a lot of people, all of these different things going on and just not really knowing how, trying to make all the different changes, staying away from all the dietary triggers and sleeping upright and doing all
oh,
these things and really just not knowing,
well, and that's the thing. I think that my goal, and I know we've talked about this in the past. My goal is always just to give people more information, because I feel like everyone, the more they know about their own health conditions, the more empowered they are to make decisions and understand what's happening in their own bodies and have informed discussions with their healthcare providers. And I think that's just super important. So, but I have appreciated being able to talk about a little bit of the ways that things that we love can not love us back. So
Definitely. Well, we'll definitely have to have you back on. We'll be back and we'll definitely have you back. And if you've enjoyed listening to Ashlie, Dr. Morrissey, please check out her wonderful article on the vagus nerve on foodguides.com. and she has more articles coming as well. It's very neat read for sure. So thank you again for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you, you as well, and take care, everyone.